Kutcher, in love with Mila Kunis on that 70s show. Then they break up for absolutely no reason after he starts hanging out with Diddy. Then he marries Demi Moore, who drained him of all the adrenochrome she can, and apparently he replenished himself by doing inappropriate things with their daughters.
Had a big life, and Ashton's adult life was just beginning. I didn't see all that because I was inside of it. I just felt like a 15-year-old girl hoping somebody liked me.
That's all true. I think that I had been responsible for so much of my life. And all of a sudden this window opened up where I was safe, I had money, he loved my children. It wasn't something he feared. He seemed to be comfortable with the enormity of the ex-husband. I mean, I felt like I was not coming with baggage, I had trunk.
What looked like a fairy tale romance between Ashton Kutcher and Demi Moore was hiding a dark reality betrayal, shocking scandals, and heartbreak that no one saw coming. From secret pressures to explosive cheating revelations, this is the untold story Hollywood never wanted you to hear. Demi Moore is once again pulling back the curtain on her turbulent journey, this time shining a light on one of the most dissected chapters of her life, her marriage to Ashton Kutcher. What began as a romance full of spark, hope, and possibility, quickly veered into darker territory, especially after Diddy became a fixture in their orbit. Demi admitted she often felt pressured to mold herself into the kind of partner she believed Ashton wanted, someone younger, wilder, and more adventurous. That pressure chipped away at her sense of self. Over time, she crossed personal boundaries and compromised values she had once held firm, leaving behind emotional scars that never fully healed. While the public saw a glamorous couple projecting happiness, privately Demi was fighting the suffocating weight of addiction, doubt, and an identity slipping away. Nights spent trying to be the fun partner often ended in choices that only deepened her disconnection from who she really was. And according to her, Ashton wasn't just a bystander in this unraveling. He was orchestrating much of it. Demi's story, however, begins long before Hollywood stardom. Born on November 11, 1962, in Roswell, New Mexico, her early years were shaped by instability, poverty, and trauma. Her biological father walked out before she was born, and her stepfather, though present, never truly filled the void. Both parents struggled with alcoholism, and the family's constant moving left her without a sense of home or security. By the time she was 12, Demi's childhood was shattered when she found herself desperately trying to save her mother after a suicide attempt. Just a few years later, another devastating betrayal came when her mother allowed an older man to exploit her for money. That moment, Demi has admitted, carved deep wounds into her relationship with trust, intimacy, and self-worth, scars she carried well into adulthood. School offered no reprieve. Undiagnosed dyslexia and surgeries for crossed eyes left her feeling isolated and restless. By 16, she dropped out entirely, choosing independence over chaos, surviving on odd jobs and modeling while clinging to distant dreams of something greater. Her break came in the 1980s with roles in General Hospital and the ensemble hit St. Elmo's Fire. Suddenly, Demi Moore was a rising star. By the early 90s, she was one of the most bankable actresses in Hollywood. Yet, even as fame brought wealth and acclaim, the demons of her past lingered. Addiction, self-doubt, and the fear of abandonment trailed her into every success. Her role in Ghost transformed her into an international superstar, elevating her from a promising actress to a household name overnight. The film's massive success not only secured her place in the A-list but gave her the power to demand record-breaking salaries. Films like A Few Good Men, Indecent Proposal, and Disclosure kept her at the top, admired for her grit and her ability to embody complex women. But fame came at a cost. By the mid-1990s, every move she made, whether shaving her head for G.I. Jane or negotiating multi-million-dollar contracts, was under a microscope. The same daring spirit that made her a trailblazer also made her a target, and the pressure to uphold her image weighed heavily. Amid the career highs, it was her personal life, especially her marriage to Kutcher, that soon commanded the spotlight and tested her resilience in ways the cameras could never capture. When Demi met Ashton in 2003, their relationship looked like a fairy tale. Despite a 15-year age gap that fascinated tabloids, the two seemed inseparable, blending their lives seamlessly with Demi's 3 daughters from her marriage to Bruce Willis. But cracks appeared early. A miscarriage cast a long shadow on their bond, leaving Demi with unspoken grief. even more destabilizing was Ashton's attitude toward sobriety. After 2 decades of hard-won recovery, Demi was shaken when Ashton questioned whether alcoholism was even real. His offhand suggestion about moderation felt like a direct challenge to the identity she had built around her sobriety. Wanting to please him, she returned to drinking and doing years of recovery in a single choice. Soon came the threesomes, an arrangement Ashton encouraged after nights of partying with Diddy. Demi admitted she agreed, not out of genuine desire, but out of a desperate attempt to be the partner Ashton wanted. What began as a way to keep him close only eroded trust and blurred boundaries. The breaking point arrived when Demi learned through a Google alert, no less, that Ashton had cheated at Danny Masterson's bachelor party. His explanation, that their prior threesomes somehow excused his infidelity, was a gutting blow. When he cheated again soon after, it was clear their foundation had crumbled. By 2011, their marriage was over, leaving Demi not only with the loss of a partner but with the collapse of an identity she had built around him. The fallout plunged her into one of the darkest stretches of her life, marked by addiction, health scares, and emotional breakdowns she would spend years recovering from. Interestingly, not everyone remembered the relationship the way Demi did. In fact, some of the voices surrounding her marriage to Ashton Kutcher told a story that looked very different from the one she revealed in her memoir. One of the most notable came from Sean Diddy Combs, who in a 2010 essay for Time magazine, reflected on the days when he and Ashton were inseparable. In the early 2000s, the two were regular fixtures in Los Angeles nightlife, embodying the quintessential bachelor lifestyle of the era. VIP tables, exclusive clubs, and long nights surrounded by flashing lights and celebrity entourages defined their weekends. At the time, Ashton was not just a sitcom star. He was the charismatic young face of Hollywood's new generation, handsome, playful, and often the life of the party. But, according to Diddy, everything shifted in 2003 when Ashton walked into a club with Demi Moore on his arm. For Diddy, who had seen Kutcher's nights filled with champagne toasts and endless flirting, the presence of Moore was more than just another fling. It was a declaration. Only a few weeks after that first public sighting, Ashton surprised him with a call. His words were simple but life-altering. He was in love. To Diddy, it was as if the player had benched himself voluntarily, trading the chaotic buzz of Hollywood's club scene for something quieter, more intimate, and more grounded. From the outside, it seemed like Demi had the power to transform him, to shift his priorities from fleeting indulgence to genuine devotion. For a moment, it looked like the perfect love story, the kind that could soften Ashton's boyish edges, while giving Demi the stability she had long craved. The tabloids ate it up, painting pictures of their red carpet appearances, their vacations, and their blended family life with Moore's 3 daughters. But as the years went on, the reality behind closed doors was far from the fairy tale. While Ashton may have left the public clubs, their private compromises, the quiet negotiations of intimacy, and the expectations of keeping each other satisfied, began to corrode the very foundation of their marriage. In many ways, the temptations he had supposedly abandoned never really disappeared, they simply changed form. Years later, in 2015, the story would take yet another dramatic turn. On an episode of Watch What Happens Live, actor Scott Eastwood dropped a revelation that reignited old wounds and fueled speculation about the tangled mess of betrayals that had haunted Demi and Ashton's union. In the middle of a conversation about Kutcher's work on 2.5 Men, Eastwood interrupted with his own claim. At the time of Ashton's marriage, his then-girlfriend had cheated on him with Kutcher. The admission was blunt, delivered with the kind of casual honesty that leaves jaws dropping. Eastwood suggested that this affair wasn't just a one-off misstep, it was a spark. Maybe the spark that accelerated the breakdown of Ashton and Demi's marriage. For audiences watching, it was a bombshell moment. Here was a Hollywood insider casually validating what many had suspected but never confirmed. That Kutcher's alleged infidelity wasn't limited to gossip columns, but was tangled in real relationships with collateral damage. For Demi, who had already spoken openly about how devastating it was to learn of Ashton's betrayals, Eastwood's words only underscored how public and interconnected those wounds really were. Her pain wasn't confined to private heartbreak, had ripple effects that extended into the lives of others in the same industry. To understand why these revelations landed so heavily, it's important to step back and look at the larger cultural picture of the time. In the early 2000s, celebrity relationships were dissected by tabloids with almost surgical precision. Magazines like Us Weekly and People dedicated covers to every handhold, every sidelong glance, every supposed argument. Social media was only beginning to take shape, meaning that paparazzi photos and gossip columns carried enormous weight. Demi and Ashton's relationship wasn't just a romance, it was entertainment, a storyline the public felt invested in. Their age gap, their blended family with Bruce Willis, their glamorous appearances at fashion shows and film premieres, every detail was fodder for fascination. Against that backdrop, betrayal carried double weight. It wasn't just a private breach of trust, it became part of a public narrative, the stuff of headlines and late-night talk show jokes. For Demi, already struggling with the scars of childhood, trauma and a lifelong battle with insecurity, the exposure was brutal. Infidelity alone is enough to destabilize anyone's sense of worth. Having it dissected under the glaring lights of Hollywood made the pain almost unbearable. What made Ashton's alleged actions particularly painful, as Moore herself explained, was the way they blurred boundaries she had once sworn to protect. She had already compromised, deeply agreeing to threesomes, reshaping herself into the fun partner, even breaking decades of sobriety to align with his lifestyle. These weren't just small concessions, they were seismic shifts in identity. When betrayal entered the equation, it wasn't merely about cheating, it became a crushing reminder of everything she had sacrificed in pursuit of love that, in the end, betrayed her anyway. This is where Eastwood's blunt comment resonates. His framing that his girlfriend's cheating with Kutcher was a catalyst in Demi's divorce highlights the interconnected nature of relationships in Hollywood's tight-knit circles. It wasn't just about Demi and Ashton, it was about a web of people, all caught in the fallout of choices that rippled far beyond two individuals. And in that sense, Demi's story becomes not only personal but universal, a cautionary tale of what happens when love is built on the fragile ground of compromise and performance, rather than mutual respect and authenticity. In the aftermath of the divorce, Demi Moore entered one of the most difficult chapters of her life. The collapse of her marriage wasn't just the end of a relationship, it was the collapse of an identity she had built around being Ashton's partner. For years, she had tried to reconcile the public image of their romance with the private toll it was taking on her soul. When the relationship finally shattered, she was left with pieces she wasn't sure how to put back together. Addiction resurfaced. Health scares mounted. Emotional breakdowns followed. And yet, it was also in this crucible of pain that Demi began to forge a new kind of resilience. In later years, as she reflected on that time, her perspective shifted. She came to see those betrayals not just as wounds but as lessons. She began to speak more openly about self-love, coining the phrase solo partnering to describe her philosophy of being whole and fulfilled on her own, rather than seeking completion in someone else. The very compromises that once broke her became the foundation for a new way of living, one built on valuing her own worth, setting clear boundaries, and refusing to sacrifice her identity for the sake of someone else's approval. So while Diddy remembered Ashton's love as a force powerful enough to reshape his identity, and while Scott Eastwood remembered betrayal as the spark that destroyed it all, Demi remembers something far more enduring: the hard-earned realization that no relationship, no matter how passionate or promising, is worth losing yourself. And that truth, perhaps more than any scandal or headline, is what defines her story today. In the years that followed, Moore began to look at love and relationships through a very different lens. She started speaking openly about the necessity of self-love, introducing a philosophy she calls solo partnering. For her, the idea is simple yet profound. Wholeness and fulfillment must come from within, not from trying to find completion through another person. Rather than molding herself to fit someone else's vision, Demi now prioritizes her own growth, independence, and authenticity. That shift has rippled through every part of her life. Friendships have taken on a new importance, and in a surprising twist, she has even cultivated a cordial relationship with Kutcher's current wife, Mila Kunis. When it comes to dating, Demi is no longer driven by outside pressure or traditional expectations. Instead, she's selective and intentional, choosing only connections that feel genuine and meaningful. Her life today is defined less by Hollywood's gaze and more by her own definition of happiness. Looking back, Demi Moore's story is ultimately one of resilience, reinvention, and the refusal to let pain dictate the course of her life. Her path has been anything but easy, from a childhood scarred by instability, poverty, and trauma, to becoming one of the most bankable actresses in Hollywood. She has lived on both ends of life's extremes. Success and suffering seemed to weave together in her narrative. Every dazzling accomplishment was shadowed by personal trials that could have broken her. Yet, through it all, she found a way not just to survive, but to transform. In the 1990s, Moore seemed untouchable. Films like Ghost, A Few Good Men, and Indecent Proposals cemented her place as one of Hollywood's top leading ladies. Her name alone could draw audiences, and her choices often pushed boundaries. From daring roles to negotiating record-breaking salaries for women in film. She was powerful, glamorous, and influential, a woman who appeared to have carved out a place for herself in an industry that often chewed up and discarded actresses once they no longer fit the mold of youthful desirability. Yet behind the polished premieres and glowing magazine covers, she was still wrestling with the shadows of her past, the abandonment she experienced as a child, the betrayals that shaped her adolescence, and the relentless fear of not being enough. The collapse of her marriage to Ashton Kutcher brought many of those buried insecurities into sharp relief. Ashton's alleged infidelities and the emotional strain of their relationship didn't just break trust, they forced Demi to confront how deeply she had lost herself in the process of trying to hold on to love. Time and again, she had compromised her boundaries, reshaped her identity, and muted her own needs in an effort to preserve a relationship that was already eroding beneath her. The realization was devastating, but it was also a turning point. For the first time, Demi had to face the cost of living for someone else's expectations rather than her own truth. But out of those painful chapters emerged a woman unwilling to be defined by loss. Demi's recovery and reinvention did not happen overnight. It took years of reflection, setbacks, and small victories. Along the way, she began to speak more openly about the importance of valuing one's own worth and finding strength in independence. Her concept of solo partnering grew out of this transformation, of philosophy built on the belief that wholeness comes from within, not from another person's validation. Instead of seeking completion in romantic relationships, she shifted her focus inward, nurturing her own growth, healing, and authenticity. This shift has redefined the way she approaches every relationship in her life. Family, friendships, and even romance are no longer spaces where she feels compelled to sacrifice herself. They are extensions of her own wholeness, not substitutes for it. Remarkably, she has even managed to cultivate an amicable relationship with Kutcher's current wife Mila Kunis, sign not of unresolved pain, but of her ability to release bitterness and move forward with grace. Her commitment to self-acceptance has also reshaped her public presence, where she was once scrutinized relentlessly for her looks, her choices, and her relationships. She now speaks with candor about her journey, using her story to encourage others to embrace their own. In interviews, Moore radiates a sense of hard-earned wisdom. She is unafraid to discuss addiction, heartbreak, or failure, because she no longer sees them as shameful stains, but as chapters that shape the woman she has become. In many ways, her resilience mirrors the characters she once portrayed on screen, strong, layered women who carried both vulnerability and power. But unlike the scripts of Hollywood, Demi's story has no neat ending. It is an ongoing evolution, a testament to the idea that reinvention is always possible, no matter how devastating the fall. Her courage lies not in pretending that pain never existed, but in choosing to live authentically in spite of it. Today, Demi Moore's life is less about Hollywood's expectations and more about the quiet, steady work of being true to herself. She is selective in the relationships she invests in, intentional with her time, and deeply committed to surrounding herself with people and experiences that reflect her values. Her story is no longer about chasing validation or fitting into an idealized image of what a woman, actress, or partner should be. Instead, it's about carving out a life defined by authenticity, balance, and self-respect. In the end, Demi Moore's journey reminds us that reinvention is not about erasing the past but about rewriting its meaning. Her scars, once sources of shame, have become symbols of survival and strength. Her voice, once silenced by fear of judgment, now carries with it the weight of lived experience and the courage to inspire others. She is no longer just the actress who captivated audiences in blockbuster films or the tabloid fixture whose relationships were scrutinized to exhaustion. She is a woman who has faced the darkness, stumbled, risen, and chosen again and again to keep moving forward. Her story is no longer about survival. Alone, it is about growth, self-acceptance, and the freedom that comes from living authentically, regardless of what the world expects. And in that, Demi Moore has given herself the greatest role of all, the role of her true self.